Well, hello again, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's BU Alumni panel discussion. I love networking, said no one ever. My name's Jeff Murphy. I'm a member of the Alumni Career Engagement Team in the Office of BU Alumni Relations. Today's panel event is offered to our 366,000 alumni around the globe and all of our current students. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals, and we aim to do this by providing everybody with access to a series of valuable online tools and social media communities. Before we got started, we were having people chat in with where they're coming from. I know that we have alumni and students joining us from around the world, some very far away places, so please know that we really do value your participation in this and every event that we offer. Before we dive in and introduce our panelists, just two quick housekeeping notes from me. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the BU Alumni and Friends website, which you can find at www.bu.edu/alumni. And secondly, our guests today are quite eager to answer any questions that you may have that come up during the presentation. You're welcome to submit your questions throughout our discussion today using the Q&A function on Zoom. Much like the chat, just click on Q&A, go ahead and type in your question at any time. If we get any that come in that are incredibly timely, I might throw them out there. Otherwise, we'll probably save a lot of time at the end to make sure we get to all of your questions. So let's meet our distinguished panel for today. Some really great alumni that we're super excited to have here. But actually, you know what, before we do that, I'm curious to know if anybody feels like, you know, I was obviously having a little bit of fun with the title of our event today. I think there are some long-held misconceptions and myths about what networking is and isn't. So I'm curious to know, the folks that have tuned in so far, go ahead and let us know how much you agree with the statement, I love networking. And I realize that might not be totally an if this or that answer, but I'm curious to see if people agree with me or not. So we've got about half the folks here that have answered our poll. All right, I'm going to go ahead and actually, so our panelists, before we introduce you, how do you think this is going to land? Do you think folks have a distaste for networking? Are they positive about it? Anybody want to make a guess?
I'll go ahead and say I don't like the idea of it. I never liked the formal idea of networking, but I think the actuality of it is very different. So
yeah, Diego, you're going to say something?
I'm going to say 60% false. We'll see where that lands.
Oh, can you see behind the scenes with me?
I cannot.
Oh, what a great guess. 65% of folks don't love networking, and about a quarter of them are here with positive feelings about networking, which is great, and some other folks that are undecided and will let us know at the end of this discussion how they feel about it, although we're not going to quiz anybody again. So, well, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'm going to ask all of you to sort of briefly introduce yourselves, and we're going to go just in order of the way that I see you on my screen here. Alexis, graduated Questrom 2014. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your BU experience and where you are now, what you do for work, et cetera?
Sure. Nice to see everybody. So Alexis Redman, I graduated Questrom 2014. I think my time at BU, I did quite a lot. I was a campus leader. I was an RA. I was very heavily involved with the Howard Thurman Center during my time at BU. And when I graduated, I got a job offer from Workday. We were a very small company at the time. So I started my career in functional consulting, and I have been with Workday. It'll be 9 years since I've been with Workday. So I transitioned from consulting into a more strategic role. So my current role is an implementation strategy director, where I provide customers with advisory support. So I have had the opportunity to have my whole career so far at one company, and I've been able to connect with a large number of medium enterprise companies as well as Fortune 500 clients. So very excited to be here. And I was also the chair of Boston University's Young Alumni Council.
Alexis, I've known you since you were a student. I didn't realize that you've been at the same company the entire time. That's great.
I know, thank you.
James, you have also been somebody that I've known for a long time. Do me a favor and introduce yourself to our audience here today.
Will do. Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everybody. I was a graduate of CLA 1991 in international relations, which I guess makes me party now, but
Party, yes.
party. Yeah, that was actually the first year of the international relations degree program when I was there, if I recall
Oh, wow.
correctly. So very interesting. Concentration in business and economics. So Questrom guys, we're all right there anyway. Same stuff. I did a little bit of traveling after college. I ended up living in San Francisco for a little. Back in Honolulu, where I was from. I eventually got back to New York and worked in financial services for Merrill Lynch 25 something years ago. Did 7 years with them, and then moved to another firm, and then a couple of acquisitions later with Stifel, which is a middle market investment bank in New York for excess of 15 years, or maybe 20 if you count the legacy acquisitions. Anyway, been a while. So still in financial services here. Networking has become a kind of integral part of it. And I don't know, life is networking after a while, right? Whether you're hanging out with your friends or going to an art show you like or a concert that you like. I mean, it's all really networking. So I try not to think about it like networking.
Yeah, we'll dive into that more. But James, thanks for being here and all you do for BU. Diego, you've had a super interesting career and have some involvements in a lot of really interesting things. Would you mind telling our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, happy to be here. My name is Diego Torres-Palma. I went to undergrad for civil engineering and then to BU to pursue an MBA at Questrom and graduated in 2013. During my time there, I actually had a bow tie company, oddly enough. And so there are archives of me and Dean Elmore, either like making fun videos together or just having fun BU events where we're both rocking bow ties. He even jumped into if you guys remember, to the Charles with one of our bow ties, which
that was your bow tie. We have a lot
of
of folks that'll never forget that day. That's for sure.
No, I will. I'm right there with them. And then after BU, I helped start a tech company, which led me to San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco for about 4 years doing the tech thing. And then I am now in Los Angeles and I've been here for about 6 years, and I started a real estate development company. Outside of that, we have a podcast where we sit down with one founder a week, sometimes household names, sometimes they're politicians, sometimes they're celebrities. And we just talk about the realities of entrepreneurship. And so it's not all glitz and glamour, but the hard stuff. And we do that in an effort to try to inspire entrepreneurs through truth. And that's me. So thanks. Honored to be here and excited to answer any questions anyone might have.
And your podcast is doing really, really well. What's it called and where can people find it? Everywhere, I assume?
Yeah, it's called Startup to Storefront. Everywhere. Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, it's everywhere.
Thanks, Diego. And Tammy, you also have a podcast.
Yes, I do. It's called Work from the Inside Out, which is also the same title as my book that came out a year ago. But back to my BU days, which was quite a few years ago, I got my MBA in my late 20s, and I was working for the city of Boston, which had a very special program for city employees. I was working in public policy and politics at the time, and it was an MBA in public and nonprofit management. And I was just fascinated by management and how organizations run, and that's why I did the program. I got one of the best pieces of career advice ever from the then director of the MBA program. And I remember her name was Debbie, but I don't remember her last name. But anyway, I knew that I wanted to be in business for myself even then. And so several years later, I got coaching training and moved in that direction, really back to my roots from an earlier career I had had where I had been doing a lot of direct service. So today I'm a career and executive coach, and I'm on a mission to help as many people as I can find more meaning and satisfaction and fulfillment in their careers throughout their lifetimes. Because the thing that we spend more time at than anything else during the best years of our lives is at work. And so here we are. I'm really excited to be here and talk about networking.
Well, and Tammy, I dragged you back into this because you did a separate presentation for us a month or two ago. And, I've been running career webinars for almost 10 years now. And I feel like you've got some really fresh perspective on what networking can be and doesn't have to be. And so we've asked you today to maybe keep our other panelists honest, but also to share some of that advice. So let's start here. And again, thank you all of you for being here today. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Of the folks, how do you feel about the poll that came out? Do any of you, would you say I love networking? Anybody want to volunteer to go first?
I would say I wouldn't.
You would
Just
not go
don't-
first, or you wouldn't love networking, Diego?
You know, it's funny. The way I sort of view this is, I think I have this belief, and you know, it's kind of controversial, but I have this belief that we're all actually introverts until people want to discuss the things we like. And then all of a sudden we're happy to talk about it. And the example I give is I have two nephews, they're 4 and 6. If they meet you and they don't really know you, they're kind of shy. But if you approach them and talk about dinosaurs, it's over. You'll have their attention for the next 6 years. And so I think we're all sort of like this. And so the question starts really, to me, in terms of networking, of what am I really interested in? And what are my sort of belief systems and what things energize me? And then how can I go meet people that sort of agree with that internal belief?
All right, so are you in the yes category? Yes, I love networking.
I think I'm more in the no category, to be honest. I'm kind of split,
Fair.
but I'm 50% in the no category.
All right, Tammy, you had your hand raised. Are you
Yeah.
giving us, your own personal feelings about it, or the professional advice that you give your clients here?
It's a both and. So I enjoy networking. And in fact, I have several people in my life who will say things to me like, oh, you know everybody. And that's not exactly true, but I do, and I'm a wildly curious person. And I think that's why I have a podcast, and that's where the book came out, is that I love learning about other people's stories and what got them to where they are, and the pathways that they took. And that's actually one of the big pieces of advice that I give other people about networking is don't make it about yourself, actually make it about the other people you speak with. So I love what Diego just alluded to is when he's with his nephews, he's talking with them about what they're interested in. And I find that those are some of the best networking conversations is when you focus on other people rather than on yourself. I think too often people dread networking because they think they're supposed to show up in a certain way. They're supposed to look good. And so you start to almost feel like you're not yourself anymore. And so if you can just show an interest in other people and learn about them, that's going to actually give you important information that can help you move forward. So I have a lot more I can say about that, but
And we definitely will. Alexis, my colleague approached you about being on this panel, and I wasn't there, but I heard that maybe there was a bit of eye rolling or a bit of ugh coming out of you, but for a very particular and good reason. What's your own answer to that question?
So I think the traditional concept of networking where you're in like a big room of people, like that gives me pure anxiety. And I remember in undergrad and like having to go through those traditional networking events, and I dreaded it. And I felt like it was really stressful. I felt like I wasn't being a version of myself, but I think the type of networking that I have come to enjoy is more of like that one-on-one networking in very smaller groups. And that may speak to like my personality and who I am. But I think over time within my career, having smaller conversations and maybe more meaningful conversations with less people, I think I get more value out of that versus going into a room of people that maybe I don't know and having to figure out who I'm going to meet. So I think we all, to Diego's point, have that fear. Everybody wants to be liked. Everybody has that anxiety. So the traditional networking, I don't necessarily like. I roll my eyes a bit with that. But I think the smaller personal connections, that's where I have found success.
And James, I won't answer the question for you, but you have been an incredibly important volunteer for us running networking events for BU alumni in New York City for many, many years now. So I'm guessing your answer would be yes, you love it.
No, don't like it. But it's only becomes it comes in that like networking box, which I think is, it's just a space that everyone grows up hearing, and it's like it's just a dirty word. So while we call it that because it's what it is in theory, and I think it's different as you age, right? I mean, like when I was first out at BU, I think like I got actively involved in the Surf Fighter Foundation. It was like beach cleanups and et cetera, whatever, something that you connect with somebody on, and you're not necessarily trying to jump down somebody's throat for business or a job. You're just trying to connect with people and have a human experience that's common. And then as I kind of graduated through the cycle, I mean, the BU situation, obviously, it was interesting. It was fun. And, New York's a big city. I think we have as many people here as in Boston or close to it as it relates to alumni. So there was a lot of good folks around, and that was interesting. And, at a time when we were still doing it live, and then the COVID was a whole nother experience. So we went through the Zoom cycles, and we actually got to meet more people because we were getting everybody from tri-state area instead of people who could make it to the Empire Hotel at 7 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday or whatever. So, very different experiences, and that goes up and down the scale of my network. So,
and I mean, you've helped hundreds, if not thousands, of BU alumni make connections in New York City. What was your motivation for getting involved in making that happen? Was it to build your own network and purely just out of an interest in helping others?
I mean, I think we're always all trying to, part of the BU experience was like making friends, and part of friendship is looking for each other, helping each other out when you can. And that's just it on a bigger scale. BU was a great community when I was there. I think it was an enjoyable place to be where I learned a lot. And an extension of that has continued as an adult. So it's nice to pass along. I met a ton of young kids that are looking to get into finance, or, look at my LinkedIn and see the various areas that I've gotten involved in over the years. And they're like, what's that? And how do I get involved? So I'm always happy to connect the dots. The worst thing that happens is, it just takes some time because everyone's there's a lot of people hitting you all at once, or I do get some BU connects randoms that hit me there sometimes, which I'm just not accustomed to checking. So, but I try and stay up with it because I know you guys are making the effort to make it work. So that is
I'll definitely talk more about that at the end. So you've all touched on this already, but maybe giving everybody a chance to sort of clearly state, we all talked about that old idea of what networking was and makes all of us go ick. So what are the common misconceptions about networking, and how did you learn to kind of make it your own? Does anybody want to take a stab at that first?
Sure. I think with the pandemic, I became adamant about the coffee chats, right? So I think, and that is where I feel like I really excelled with my networking journey. Like, yes, I've been at the same company, for the past 9 years or so, but I've been able to meet like so many different people within my company just by saying, hey, let's say my people leader said that you'd be a good person to connect with. Let me have a coffee chat with you. I think also, as well as we go throughout our careers, when you do a really good job, like people actually remember that and people talk about the work that you do. And I think that is a form of networking, if you want people to think about you when you leave the room. So I think the coffee chats have been really successful, and as well as joining, let's say James mentioned it, like different clubs, even in the workplace, joining different like employee resource groups, right? I became a leader of Black at Workday, our employee resource group, and I was able to expand my network exponentially with our C-suite, different executives within the company, as well as different members and allies, just by joining and becoming a leader of that group. So I think it's a combination of reaching out to people, because I have never had a person say no, that I don't want to chat with you. Everybody is typically very interested in talking about themselves and getting to know each other and having that social connection. So when I go into these coffee chats, it's not like, what do you do? That kind of thing. I think it's balancing like social as well as work, and then being able to develop those relationships. Because at the end of the day, it's really about relationship building and connecting with people.
I'd love to build on what Alexis was just talking about. And I think she gives a great example, having been in her role for several years, is the idea that, networking can take many forms. It doesn't have to just be when you're looking for what's next for you, that it's really about developing those relationships over time. And I find that a lot of people they'll network when they're looking for their next job, and then they kind of let it go after they land somewhere. And that's the biggest mistake that people can make, because they think that the only role for networking is to land that next job, when in fact, it really isn't. It actually should be exactly what Alexis was just talking about, is developing relationships, having it feel social, just knowing people, knowing something about them, and not just about having to show up in a certain way, in a more awkward way, or at a point where you're feeling maybe a little bit more vulnerable in some ways. And so I think that helps to really reinvent the way that you handle networking, or really it's relationship building.
Mm-hmm. And James, you had told me, obviously you're going to the traditional networking event, the place to get coffee with a large group of people, but you're also really heavily involved in a lot of boards, which I imagine, was that a strategic thing for you to build your network, or did it just kind of happen as a happenstance in your career?
I would say the first thing that happened is my father happened to pass away of something called progressive supernuclear palsy. This was 99 or so when I found out he had it, and they were a very small nonprofit, like a bunch of pamphlets in a cardboard box near Johns Hopkins. And I was like, wow, trying to find a productive way to make something out of that. So I started getting involved in holding support group meetings for people in New York who had similar issues, and went on to. I took a little time off as my father had his issues he worsened, but I came back to them many years later, ran back into the CEO, and he'd done some incredible things with the branding and the marketing. And it was kind of like, you want to make lemonade out of a bad situation. So I went on to get involved with them on the development side. And then in 2018, I went back to school and I got an advanced diploma in cybersecurity at NYU. And I was sitting at the board meeting for Cure PSP one day, and we had a cyber breach that was kind of affiliated. So they all knew I'd been doing this diploma, and they all pointed down to me, like, guess who's the new CISO of, Cure PSP. So it was, the next role with that. And like with that whole cyber relationship, I ended up joining an FBI affiliated organization called InfraGard, which is for critical infrastructure protection of the nation. So it's water, it's cyber for business, it's for medical stuff, it's for everything. So I ended up getting involved there, and then getting on the executive board. I was recently voted onto the board of directors. So all these things have tied in, and one seems to tie into the next, and to Tammy's point, staying involved when things are calm is as important as staying involved when things are chaotic. It tends to be part of the group where you just reflect being real and being human with people, and I think that's fine. Like if you're more prone to one-on-ones, or if you're awkward or whatever it is, you're going to find somebody out there that's probably just like you or similar, or go someplace where you're into the same music or the same art, and you're going to find a connection there that's real and based on something real. And I think pushing people into a room where it's like, go network, and then, that is weird. I think that's hard to do. And like, I don't think you don't get as much of a real result out of it either. So I would advise people to kind of lean into their interests. Yeah. Lean into their natural network, lean into their friend group, and expand it out. It's like playing in the sandbox. You figure it out and you find your way.
Diego, I mean, what you told me about your career, it sounds like you've taken all of these interests in your life and figured out a way to tie them together. Tech company, real estate ventures, you're super involved in community development issues. Is it just natural for you, or was it something that you really had to sort of purposefully connect everything together?
It's funny. Just the club I belong to, I'll sort of answer the question in a long-winded way, but I think one of the things that helps in terms of networking, and I mentioned this before, is like I joined a tennis club here in Los Angeles, and I think networking can start at a simple level, whether it's a pickleball club or a book club or something like that, where there's a shared interest, and then all of a sudden relationships develop. What's weird about it is I'm here at this tennis club in Los Angeles, and there's a big group of people from Boston, some of which attended BU. And so what ends up happening is you all end up finding each other. The East Coasters all end up finding each other. And then there's a bunch of shared interest, and you end up just developing a friendship based on a sport. And then you get to know what they do later in business. And it just becomes a really cool relationship where if you need somebody, you're like, oh, what do you do? I'm looking for a lawyer, I'm looking for a writer, or I'm looking for a musician. And they might happen to be that individual. At a high level, when I give people advice, it's like, if we're all like right now, there's 5 people, right, that people can see, and we can all serve a purpose. We could all actually help each other, and we could actually all start a company. And so let's say, Jeff, you wanted to buy a building to make BU Connects have an established setting. You'd say, we need a developer. Oh, that's Diego. And then we could go around this circle right here, and everyone could have an interesting angle and help. And so I think it starts with, in general, I think networking starts with, how do I help the group of people I happen to be with? And then how do we collectively create something amazing, right? What I love about real estate development is I can't be the architect. I can't be the engineer. I can't be the lawyer. And so everyone has a really interesting role in creating a really beautiful experience for the end product, almost like an album, almost like a movie. There's so many moving parts and we all play a fun role. And so I try to take that approach when it comes to networking, and the tennis club has helped me tremendously.
I want to build on.
Go ahead, Tammy.
I just want to build on something Diego was pointing out there, because this is sort of the pinnacle of what I say to people about networking all the time. And that is information. That networking at its very core is about getting information. It's about research, even though you may not see it quite that way. But when people, especially when people are looking for their next job and they're already feeling anxious about it, rather than thinking about how you show up, it's more about, and people, when they're feeling that kind of anxiety, they are usually thinking about themselves. But what's really going on around that anxiousness is that they don't have all the information they need. And so the beautiful thing about what Diego was just talking about is you start to just connect with people you already know, who also know other people, to get the information you need. And that's when your shoulders start to go down and you start finding your way through. That's a big piece of networking, is getting the information you need so that you can move forward.
The word that you used, Tammy, that really stuck with me in our previous event together was actually inspiration, right? And so it was about getting the information that you need to understand what you need to do to make your next move or get where it is that you need to go.
True. And I think when you hear somebody else's story, you get in touch with somebody and you find out, how did you land in the company you're in? Or where were you before this? You get inspired by other people's stories. It starts to spark ideas in your own mind. And it may not come to you immediately. It might be that you have a casual conversation with somebody one day. It might even be at a party or something. And then 3 days later, you wake up in the morning and you have a new thought about something that you can do. And so you have to kind of let some of these things happen organically. I think when people start to try to push, that round peg into a square hole, especially for introverts, that's not going to last very long. It's going to drain you and it's going to take you in directions you don't want to go. And I think that especially for introverts around networking, if they're dreading it, that 65% we saw in that poll originally here, there's every reason to not go to big events if you don't enjoy big events. There's lots of ways to connect with people, get information you need, and enjoy those conversations in a more meaningful way.
So let's take a look at this. This is something I want to share. There's this idea out there that potentially 70, 80% of jobs are never actually posted online. And I told all of you before, I've never seen a scientific study that proved this, but this is something that I've heard a lot over the years. I'm guessing that you've heard it too. The idea that people are hiring people that were referred to them or acquaintances, trusted friends. I'm curious to know which of you think that this is a true statistic, that the best way to get that job is through networking. Have you personally found this in your experiences, that you got a job or an opportunity specifically because of your network? Diego, go ahead. You're nodding.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this in two ways. One way, how has it helped me personally? And I would say it's certainly true. It's almost always been my network. Even my first job out of college, my mom just happened to know, I went to work for a civil engineering firm and she just happened to know, I think, like a finance person there. So it wasn't a high level, it wasn't the president, but enough for this person to make an introduction and sort of say, hey, just like double look at that resume. And I think that helped a lot. And then personally, when it comes from me hiring people, I was just thinking of the last two people I hired. It's only been through connections. It's like I wasn't even looking to hire someone, frankly, but this person approached me. I got introduced, and then it was a value-driven conversation where there was a trade-off. They were trying to learn real estate development. I'm working heavily on 2 projects, and they want to see sort of the process of it. And so it was a perfect time for them to join me, and they've been very helpful. And that's, that was not a job posting. It was just somebody reaching out. So yeah, I would say that's certainly true.
Yeah. James, in your industry, finance, the other things that cybersecurity, do you think this statistic is true?
Absolutely. I mean, on the cyber side, especially since I'm on the board at InfraGard, which is the FBI nonprofit for, I just talk to so many people all the time, whether it's at events or whether we're, talking to sponsors and hosting events, or you hear about what's in the flow of jobs that are out there. So, and it's also one of those communities where there's a lot more jobs than there are bodies. So everybody's always kind of aware of what's going on in a smaller community. But even on the finance side too, it's like, I've gotten to work with a lot of people over the years. So, I'll get calls from people externally who see that I'm here. I know people internally who know people that I know that have moved on elsewhere. So yeah, it transcends everything, just like, to all of your guys' points. It's a community, and all of your networks and communities and relationships tend to spread out and become, something much more attuned to what you're listening to, and you're hearing each other and connecting each other. And that's what it's all about.
Alexis, you work at a pretty big firm. I know that you might not be super connected to the HR side of things, but how are people getting hired at Workday?
Yeah, so I think it's a lot of it has to do with referrals, for example. So I've had people from BU reach out to me on LinkedIn to say, hey, Alexis, we knew each other, back when we were undergrads. I'm interested in X opportunity at Workday. Like, can you refer me? I think referrals is a great opportunity, because even on the tech side, right, I've worked with many clients, like implementing Workday recruiting software, and recruiters traditionally are always looking at referrals first. So taking a look at the referrals, I think is something that is a great start. So if you know somebody that works at a particular company, having them be referred is a really good option, because I think that is what recruiters are looking at first. So I think getting in that way, especially knowing that in the tech industry, I want to acknowledge that a lot of people have been laid off. I think the referral route is what I've seen successful. And, I've referred a handful of people, to different Workday jobs just based off of them reaching out to me via LinkedIn or even BU Connects.
Great. We just got a great question from Chelsea in the chat, and I think it's a great time to go ahead and toss this out to all of you. So Chelsea's asking, when it comes to networking, especially for people from underrepresented populations, how can you expand your network, especially if your own folks aren't traditionally in the room, especially for job referrals? So how do you expand your network? And if you are, particularly for folks that are from an underrepresented population, how is that different?
I can speak to this a little bit. I think I'll give you just my personal story. I moved to Los Angeles. I decided to become a real estate developer. My wife was like, "You don't know anything about that," and she was right. I didn't know any developers. I didn't know anybody in LA, frankly. And so it was like basically the way it was. It's you're a brand new entrant in a brand new market, and you don't know anyone. How do you go ahead and facilitate some form of success? And I really just went on LinkedIn. I started just going after partners at development firms. And I just said, hey, look, I'm looking to become a developer. Will you meet with me? And what was amazing about it was all these people would meet with me. And I wasn't trying to get a job from them at all, but I was just trying to get information. I was like, look, I want to start my own firm, and here are some of my ideas. And I was kind of shocked at how the people were so friendly toward me. And politicians also, I meet with politicians saying, look, I have some ideas. I want to become a developer. And through this process over about a year, I ended up actually partnering with one of the individuals I had met. So we weren't hired, but they were working on a project that was a little too small for them. And they said, look, if you want to partner with us on this little project, it could be like your first project. And it was a perfect, they had what I needed and they were willing to help. And then we put in the work. And so I kind of think about it like, sometimes it's just a function of it's new territory and you're going to have to do some things that aren't that fun. But I think what I've learned is generally people are more than happy to help if they see something in you, if there's a promise, and that sort of doesn't really matter if you're, like in my case, brand new Latino male to this population. Yeah, so that's my personal story.
To Diego's point, there's a couple of things that come to mind. The BU Alumni Business Networking Breakfast, it's soup to nuts. It's like people of all ages, all stripes, and really you're talking to whoever's around you that you're connecting with. I think the thing that's most impactful is by you knowing what it is that you want. So if you're walking into a room and, you don't know anybody that necessarily, is somebody that you connect with immediately, as long as you know what you're looking for there, and you can talk to anybody and kind of connect. As if you guys hit on that spot where they happen to have an interest where you are, they can put you in touch with somebody who does. That's the easiest connection. The harder part when it's like, hey, help me. Like to Diego's point, he was very driven, very focused, and reached out. And another thing that in his reaching out on LinkedIn thing, if you've ever used the sort functions on LinkedIn, you can go and sort by Boston University alumni, and you can sort by city, sort by industry, and you can look for people that work at, IBM in New York City who graduated from BU. And then you could reach out to that group because you're already naturally connected, and people are going to generally be pretty warm to that reception. So those are great ways that I've found.
I want to add to this too, because there's another kind of layer of all of this, and that is, and this actually ties in with some research, which is that most people, when they do actually land where they want to be, they usually found that opportunity through a connection they don't even know right now here today. So it could be a 4th or 5th degree connection. And so I always suggest that people reach out to people, it could be your cousin who lives on the other side of the country, who happens to know somebody who works in an area that you want to learn more about. And you may not know, I agree that it helps to know what you want, but if you don't know what you want, but you have a good set of starting questions, ask those questions and then start to get the information you need and then build questions off of that. But everybody knows somebody, even your 85-year-old aunt knows people. So don't always feel like you have to reach out to people within a certain industry. I've seen people find connections through siblings, and then they get the job through somebody they didn't know today.
Yeah, Tammy, no, I definitely agree with that, right? So it may not be someone it may just be you reach out to someone and then they connect you with another person. So I think some people will say, hey, I don't really have that large of a network, but I think it's reframing that and saying, okay, here are the people that I do know. Let's see what questions they may be able to answer. And to Diego, to your point, I think it does help to have that direction, but just coming up with like a list of questions of these are the things that I'm wanting to ask, or this is what I'm interested in, because it can be a little on the receiving end of a LinkedIn request, like, do you have a job for me? And if you're not in the place to hire, like having a conversation of, are you willing to talk about your industry versus do you have a job for me? Those are two different conversations. So I agree, Tammy and Diego and James, with all of your points.
So a couple of you at least have talked about networking in terms of pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, networking during the pandemic, which primarily meant online. And so I personally feel like there's kind of a big difference in strategy and execution for networking in person in a large group at an event, when you're out and about the city versus reaching out to somebody online. So I want to ask about that. And Susan actually wrote in to ask, do any of you have, and I'm sure you have, I think we all have, when you get radio silence, you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn, you send somebody an email, you're really excited to try to connect with this person and you just don't hear anything. Has that happened to you? I'm guessing it has. And then what has your strategy been to deal with that? Diego, you spent a ton of, go ahead, Tammy.
Okay, sorry. I could, obviously I could talk about this stuff all day long.
That's why you're here. That's absolutely why you're here.
So what I find is a lot of people will send somebody a message through LinkedIn or an email through their email, and they don't get an answer. And then they start to take it personally. The first thing I want to say to everybody is, do not take it personally. There's a very good likelihood that the person you sent it to never saw your message to begin with. It either landed in spam, or they don't get notifications from LinkedIn that they have a message, and they don't check their messages on LinkedIn. Some people are not active on LinkedIn. So you need to find other ways to reach people if they're not answering their messages. And there's a great tool that I use, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but there is a great tool that I use to find people's email addresses, because they're often not available on LinkedIn. I'll see if I can get the link for it and put it in the chat. But there's also a sort of a little bit of rules of the road. When somebody doesn't answer you right away, there's, oh, thank you, Joya. Rocket Reach. There's another one too that I've used, but that I'm sure that one's great. So I always say 3 strikes and you're out. I always send an email to somebody. If they don't answer, I forward it after a few days and say, bumping this up to the top of your inbox. They usually answer that second one. If they don't answer that, then I try to find a phone number or some other way to reach them and leave them a voicemail, because who gets voicemails these days? So it's just another way to try to reach somebody. And I find that if they still don't answer you, next, move on. But it's never personal, because these people generally don't really know you very well to begin with. So it's the kind of thing where you just have to keep going on and on. Yeah, LinkedIn Sales Navigator is also a great tool, but not everybody is necessarily going to want to pay for that. But there are some paid tools on LinkedIn that are fabulous if you're willing to make the investment.
Diego, you just talked about this. You're in a new city trying to break into a new industry. I have to imagine there are some folks that just didn't get back to you. How did you handle it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was like, it's also a numbers game, right? It's like the reality of most people aren't at the moment, you know, maybe they're closing a deal, they're busy. And so to Tammy's point, you can't take it personally. And so it was always just like, and what was cool though, is the people who did meet with me, they know other development partners. And so then I would just say, who else should I speak to? And then those become introductions that someone else is making on my behalf. And so that kind of worked for me. But in terms of like, I probably get 10 LinkedIn messages a day. And so generally speaking, for me personally, LinkedIn is the worst way. Like, and of those 10, none of them are of value usually. It's always someone trying to sell me something that I don't need. And that's just what LinkedIn's become today. But I would say email for me, and then Instagram. Instagram DMs have become such a business magnet for me. It's been amazing. I mean, it's really, really been amazing, whether it's authors or you know, these icons that are releasing a book and they want to come on the podcast. So Instagram DM is like the way to actually get my attention, and I will always respond. And so I would just say that's kind of like a new tool today. Feel free to use it. And then just during this webinar, I already have 2 LinkedIn people at the event. And so that's amazing. That's amazing. So definitely connect LinkedIn, email, and Instagram. I would say email and Instagram are the 2 I definitely check.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to remind folks to take advantage of this time that we wanted to save the end for you to ask your questions of our amazing panelists. I did also want to highlight, Kathy was asking about when the next New York City breakfast networking event would be. James, thank you for answering. It sounds like you don't know right now, but I want to make sure that everybody knows you can always find out about events happening in your area by just going to our website, bu.edu/alumni. The other great thing that you can do is make sure that you've updated your address with us so we know where you are. If we don't know you're in the New York City area, we're not going to be emailing you about events happening. And just recently, we've really started, you know, not that the pandemic is over, but we are returning to in-person events in a city near you across the country and around the world. So now's a great time to make sure that you've updated your address with the university. But James, thanks for sending that info out in the chat.
Jeff, I don't know how you get onto like those BU backpage emails, but there's a lot of BU emails. You get them from your school and, you know, from this. I don't know, but the backpage ones in your local area are great.
Too many BU emails, to be honest.
I don't know how you
we've got a lot going
that,
on and a lot to tell people about. So thank you, James, for reading those. Tammy, oh, you found it. Yeah, Hunter.io. I had heard of that as well. All right. Chris is asking, what were the most consequential or interesting networking connections that you've had, and how did you make that connection? So I guess when you think back on your histories of networking, what are the ones that stand out where you really feel like, wow, I was able to connect with this person. This really had, you know, something that I did in terms of networking with folks really helped me kind of move the needle or boost my career. Alexis, do you have one that stands out?
I do. So it's, I guess, how I became like chair of and became a part of the Young Alumni Council. So it actually starts probably back my freshman year of college, where I needed another work study job, right? So BU is expensive. I needed another job. And I had a friend who knew one of the alumni directors at BU, in the BU alumni department, and I ended up becoming a work study student, and I worked there for about 3.5 years. So that's how I know Jeff. That's how I know a lot of different people within the office. So then after I graduated, I knew someone that was on the council. We were part of the same friend group when we were in college, and I actually referred him to Workday. And so you can see how it's building, right? So, and I was asked to join the council, and I then eventually was asked to chair the council. So I didn't realize, right, that asking for that job my freshman year in college would then end up me becoming the chair of a Young Alumni Council. So I feel like that story, right, it's a networking process that was built over many years, and it just built over time. And I was able to get the opportunity to connect with BU, to become the chair of the council. And really, the council, for those who don't know, it's really a group of young alums that are just invested in the university and connect with one another to advocate for young alumni voice and events. So being the chair for that was a great opportunity, but I wouldn't have been able to do that without networking my freshman year of college, and then also building relationships with people within the department ongoing. So that's my story.
Anybody else have one that's oh, go ahead, Diego, please.
I think I told you this offline. But so in LA, we're in LA, there's a lot of celebrities here, a lot of really cool people. And I ended up meeting I'll just say a Boston sports legend. And so this individual, he has a lot of homes, and I was speaking to him, and I said, you should stop buying homes, and you should start thinking about legacy, and you should start thinking about commercial real estate in a really cool way of connecting maybe sports, like a sports bar in Los Angeles. And this conversation developed over time, and he really said, you know, he has no experience with that. He doesn't know, he's not a developer. And so I said, look, I think I found the perfect building for both of us. I'm summarizing this entire relationship into like 30 seconds, but long story short, we acquired a building together. This might be public soon, and we're going to build LA's best sports bar. And I think it's a really just amazing story. And again, it just goes back to the networking of, it just so happened that I think a lot of people in the setting might be intimidated. This person's a legend, you know, but at the same time, I think we're all legends. I think we're all unicorns. I think we all have our strengths and our talents. And so it's a function of you really cracking down on your talent. And in that moment, he saw that in me and I saw that in him, and together, you know, we're going to create something amazing. And so I would say that's been probably the most interesting and coolest, and such an East Coast, you know, 2 Massachusetts guys doing something cool in LA. It's like, it writes itself. It's so good.
This always happens to me where we don't have a ton of questions that have come in, and then as we get closer to the end of the event, all of a sudden they start to flood in. So maybe we'll try to do like rapid fire here, because there's some good ones. Pamela's asked a great question. Once you've made a connection with somebody, how do you keep it fresh? She's got a large network of former coworkers, but it's always hard to keep in touch with people. So what have your strategies been? You know, Tammy, you were saying this earlier, it's not just you use your network when you are actively searching for a new job. How are people keeping those connections fresh? How are you staying in touch with people?
Well, I think there's lots of ways to do that. One would be to, you know, like I always think of around holidays and things like that, drop somebody a quick line and, you know, wish them a happy new year, or, you know, or a quick, and it doesn't have to be everybody. You might want to pick a handful of people and say, hey, I was just thinking of you and wanted to let you know, Thanksgiving, thankful to have you in my life. I mean, I've heard people who say, gee, I haven't been in touch with this person in years. Is it rude for me to reach out to them? And I always say, well, if you heard from them today, would you say that that's rude, or would you be happy to hear from them? There's your answer. So I say there's always a good time to reach out. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be formal. If you happen to know that there's maybe a group of people who are all local, maybe just announce, hey, let's grab dinner, and then say time, place, and see who can show up. Sometimes people love spontaneous things too. We don't always think about the things that just are very obvious and right in front of us. And just the fact that you invited them can spark something.
Anybody else have a comment on that one? All right, well, we can definitely move on. Diego, you talked about this a little bit with Instagram, and Taryn is wondering if any of you could speak to the value of activities about connecting with people online, like following them on LinkedIn, liking their posts on Instagram, creating your own posts to sort of establish your brand, responding to other people. Does any of you feel like you've got this really great social media networking strategy that's been working for you? Diego, obviously it's been working for you.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely works, but I will say this too. I think on our podcast, sometimes we have budding entrepreneurs that just started their company, you know, they're 2 months into their entrepreneurial journey, and they reach out and they'll comment on our podcast page, and if there's an ask there, they say, hey, look, can I come on the podcast? Can I get some FaceTime? And I set up a Zoom with them. And I go, hey, look, we usually try to interview entrepreneurs that have been at their business for at least 4 years. But tell me, like, let's do the thing. Let's just have a little conversation. And how can I help? At the end of the day, I've sat down with 200 founders. I have a pretty good sense of what works. And I'm like, look, free advice. And so it definitely helps. I think it goes back to, if your mission is to start a company, you're looking for advice, then I'm happy to give it. And so I think those things, liking, commenting, that certainly does help. It definitely gets the attention, for me anyway.
Yeah, I echo that as well. I think with like Instagram and LinkedIn as well, I think when you're commenting, when you are DMing people and actually like having a conversation, and if you're open to it, right, like that can build a relationship in itself. I think sometimes people don't realize that, hey, like sending a few messages like back and forth like via Instagram can build friendships, right? And it can also build networking relationships as well.
James, are you doing a lot online, or is it mostly in person in real life?
I know Diego's had, kind of a flood on LinkedIn, and, like, I think one of the ways that I try and keep mine sort of curated is I try not to connect with anybody and their mother. If I'm getting hit by somebody randomly that I have no idea who they are, I definitely don't accept those, just because you don't know them. Actually, the whole express purpose of LinkedIn is to like not cold bomb somebody. Mm-hmm. So I don't deal with that. I don't do it. And, if it just becomes a useless service at that point. So, I've gone through it and culled it from time to time. It gets onerous. You live long enough, you get a lot of connects on there, right? But if I can look back at that person that's reaching out to me and I can see, oh yeah, we worked here together, or we belong to this group together, or we were at this thing. Like anytime I connect with somebody, I say, hey, great meeting you yesterday at the da-da-da-da-da. So I can look back and say, who the hell was that again? Because, it gets to be a lot, but I don't think there's a better way. I think like Instagram, et cetera, is tougher for me in financial services. It's like everything is 7 layers of compliance. Whatever you post, I've got to post stuff that's, automated and approved. So it's tougher in that regard. I can put stuff in the pipeline, but where I have the most reaction is actually talking about my nonprofit stuff. If we're doing an event with Cure PSP, or you're doing something in InfraGard that's cybersecurity related, I actually noticed that the interaction is off the chart on those things, where it's something that I'm involved in personally, and I'm promoting something that's personal to me. And I see that going across my platform in ways that I never do with the canned ads, if you will.
I think this is going to end up being our last question, and it's a really great one from Rohan. Rohan's asking, what is a good daily or weekly practice to inculcate the networking habit in you? So maybe it's natural for some folks, but if it's not, how do you work it into your sort of regular life and regular schedule? Is there a regular practice that you recommend so that some of us don't have to constantly remind ourselves about taking the action to network? Are any of you that strategic about it, where you cut out time to, I'm going to work on building my network here, and here, or is it just entirely organic?
So I like to chime in. So I would say like be realistic, right? So if you look at your schedule, like maybe once a week is too much for you, right? And when you figure out what your goals are. But I think that there was a period of time, probably like 2021, where I said to myself, I'm going to get really serious like about like networking internally at my company. And I set a goal of like 30-minute coffee date like per month for like 6 months. And that was something that was actionable to me. And I was like, okay, 30 minutes, like once a month in addition to everything that I have to do was good for me. So I don't think it has to be like that, right? But thinking about like what's actionable, because if I had adjusted the goal to like every week I'm going to speak to somebody, I wouldn't feel that I would have been able to accomplish that. So I would say like start small and then build on top of that.
I want to build on what Alexis just said, that it depends on what your goals are. You know, if your goal is to, start to begin to find, let's say, your next role, you might want to figure out, who do you want to get to know? So let's say there are people, who work in certain companies, or maybe people you don't already know, but you look up to. You might want to start following them on certain social media. This is sort of picking up on the previous question too. You can start commenting on some of their posts or tagging them. And they, but of course, not in a creepy way, in a way that's productive. And start just trying to start the conversation with them. I found that can be actually a very good way to start to develop relationships with people that you may not already know, or start tagging people who you do know, who you'd like to pick up the conversation with, and they will get notified that you've tagged them in a post, maybe something that you've posted. I find that just liking things doesn't really get you anywhere, but really engaging in conversations with people does.
Well, James and Diego, as we're wrapping up here, any final thoughts, words of wisdom, final points you want to make about networking and the role it's played in your life?
I mean, I'll just say stay open. I mean, one of the things you're asking about, what can you do? A good friend of mine from Honolulu, we grew up together. She was getting divorced and kind of looking to get back out there in the world, and she wrote this blog post about the 100. And the 2-second version of it is like, you have to set a beginning point if you're looking to just start, right? And it's hard. It is hard. But she said you get on this path, and this, in her case, it was about dating. So exclude all that, but it's the same concept. You go out on 100 times, you go out, no matter what, you can't say no, and you just keep going, and you just start writing down every time you meet somebody, what you met them for, what it was for. 2, 3, you're not going to get, I've never made it past 50 without finding whatever it was I was seeking, whether that was, a date, a business, a job, whatever it was. So like, it forces you to be proactively kind of logging what you did with your time, so you can look backward and see you've been making progress, you're working towards a goal. It's sort of like when you're downloading a program, you can see where you are in that bar. So I found that that's been a great way to like kind of force yourself to jump into the water, especially if you're not good at it.
Great, thanks.
I'll just say actionable. So it's like, here you are, you're on this webinar for a reason. You have people in front of you, me being one of them. If we can help you, reach out to us on LinkedIn or Instagram, however you want. And I'm certainly happy to give you a 20-minute Zoom and chat. And I think just live in service to whatever help or wherever direction you're trying to go. And so that's my closing thought there, is just, I'm happy to help. Reach out.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Diego. Thank you all for being on our panel today. We've got a lot of folks chatting in here just to say how much they've enjoyed this webinar and found it helpful. I do, of course, want to close by saying I hope all of you join BU Connects. If you haven't heard of it before, think of it as our own private university LinkedIn. It is the official BU online networking and mentoring platform where we make it incredibly easy to find people from the BU community that are willing to help. They actually sign up and say what kinds of things they're willing to offer. So if you are new to networking, if you get really stressed out by networking, this is an awesome way to find a bunch of people who are a warm call instead of a cold call, and get out there and start taking a lot of this advice, learning about folks, getting inspired, helping understand how you might apply some lessons learned from other people to your own life. So BU Connects. I also, again, we are restarting in-person events in cities around the world just go to bu.edu/alumni, and it's very easy to navigate over to our events calendar. We can always find out about events that are happening in cities near you. They are not always just pure networking events. We've got educational events. It's a tremendous amount of different kinds of things that you can get involved in. We had a lot of folks talking about making connections in the entertainment and TV industry. We've got a thriving network in Los Angeles and New York City for those. You can actually join industry-specific networking groups on BU Connects. So that's always a great way to find out more about how to make those connections in something that you're interested in. I hope that you will all join us for our next online career event. It's going to be next Tuesday. We've got a great session that is called Slow Down to Get Ahead, Mindfulness for Work and Life Balance. We're actually dedicating the month of April to talking about work-life balance and whether or not it's a real thing and how people can achieve it. So one last time, all of you on the end there, I hope you're applauding at home, but thank you so much to all of our panelists. You all did a wonderful job, and I'm really thankful you're able to give this time back to the BU community.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody.
Jeff.
All
Yeah,
right.
Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, especially those of you who've donated to the university. We really appreciate your support, and I hope you all have a great day or a great evening wherever in the world you might be. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.